Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Albert Kahn through the ages. What we have found is some people know a little bit about a part of Albert Kahn's practice and career and certain projects. And this is a kind of a fun opportunity to share the big picture of Albert Kahn through the ages, some of the most significant sort of things. It's only the tip of the iceberg. There's so much. But this is a high level of things, and I'm hoping one of you at least, or each of you say, I didn't know that. So that's what we're trying to get is just a little, huh, or, oh, I knew that, but I didn't know that. So today we're going to just kind of go through that. We're gonna organize this. Welcome. We're really glad that you're here. We're gonna talk about the man behind the movement, some little stories and treasures, kind of treasure stories of Albert Kahn's archives. We're going to talk about a little bit the Albert Kahn Associates today and tomorrow, and then a little bit about the Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation. So hopefully you will enjoy. So thank you. The man behind the movement. So Albert Kahn was born in 1869 in Rouen, Germany. So he and his family, that's his whole family there, and he is on the far right. They arrived in America in 1881, and he was only 12 years old. Being the oldest son of an immigrant family means that all of those people need to have food on their table, and the older kids had to pitch in and help. And so Albert did not go to school when he got here at 12. He went to work. And so he mucked stables and he did a whole lot of stuff to try to help support and add to the help of this family. Fast forward a little bit, he became an office boy at Mason and Rice. He had another, he had some other opportunities too, but he mucked stalls in the morning and they didn't really appreciate him coming from there to an office. And so once he got into Mason and Rice, he just kind of hit his groove. And, they mentored back in those days. You didn't have to go to school for architecture. You got to learn from those that were doing it. And so as an office boy, he went from sharpening pencils and doing whatever needed to be done to actually participating on the drawing boards. In 1890, he had won a scholarship to travel Europe. And so that really was his education, his formal education, you might want to say, where he studied architecture across Europe, and did sketches, wonderful sketches of the architecture. And he came back, and by age 22, he became the head designer at Mason and Rice, who was a pretty significant firm in Detroit doing some major projects. And so it was a pretty big deal for somebody at his age to be the head designer in a firm like that. In 1895, Albert decided to start his own practice. He started with Nettleton, Kahn, and Trowbridge. The business was difficult. They entered a recession. And so his partners, one of them passed away, one of them moved away, and he folded back into George Mason's office in 1897, just temporarily so he could get his feet back on the ground. But some of the projects that he had done when he was first started was in 1896, the Hiram Walker Children's Hospital. So that was his first hospital project. He had done houses and different types of projects. When he was back with George Mason, worked with the Palms Apartments. So he was already getting his feet wet in some pretty significant projects in Detroit. Albert happened to be at the right place at the right time in Detroit during its certainly its industrial revolution, its heyday, going from cars to industrial stuff. Henry Ford and all of those guys it was the center for all of this research and automobiles and lots of companies, and he was right there in the middle of it in Detroit as Detroit was growing. So going into some of the stories, some of the things that made Albert Kahn unique and special is he did not just automobiles in factories. He did the residence and the business and the house of worship and the entertainment clubs and community projects. So he did all of the types of projects that his clients were dealing with. And so, just to name a few of the projects here on this page is, to the far right upper, the aquarium on Belle Isle. And directly below that is the Detroit News. He did the House of Worship, so it was the Temple Bethel in downtown Detroit. He did the Detroit Golf Club and the Cranbrook House. So, I mean, he did lots of multiple kind of variety of projects. And so that's what's delightful is to see his portfolio. So looking at George Booth for an example, he did the Cranbrook House in 1906. He had the Scripps Booth Krolik relationship. He did the Booth newspapers and the publishing. Both he and Booth were involved in the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts. So they shared this passion for the arts and crafts style of architecture. And to show just how close that relationship, he also did George Booth's tombstone. So it went from their house, the business, and all the way to the tombstone. So that says something about the kind of relationship that Albert had with his clients. I have a quote on there. Kahn was a member of the Detroit Museum of Art's original exhibition committee promoting the arts and crafts movement in America. He was planting the seed of what would become the Detroit Society of Arts and Crafts. Albert was a founding member of that society. And, all that arts and crafts that we see in Detroit, that's kind of that signature Albert Kahn. Well, he was involved. He was inspiring others in that market. Another relationship that is fascinating to look at is his relationship with Joseph Boyer. So Joseph was Albert Kahn's first industrial client, and that was in the boroughs. Actually, first is the pneumatic tool project. So Boyer's Detroit residence he did in 1901. He did the pneumatic tool project in 1902. He was involved in the Burroughs Adding Machine Company and the Boyer buildings, which are, more what do I want to say? Business buildings. And also, again, Joseph Boyer's mausoleum. So, look for how this relationship formed and went around Detroit in a bunch of different ways through this one client. And I'm watch for Chris Meister's book that he's working on right now to tell some of those stories of some of these people that Albert had relationships with. And so I'm going to highlight as we go through some of the places to dig a little deeper into some of those. And thanks for people writing about this. So Albert was directly motivated. He cared about people. I mean, you could tell because of the relationships he had with his clients, but he also saw a need and was interested in responding to that need. So we know that at the turn of the century, when when factories were built out of wood and they're used for manufacturing, it was a tinderbox waiting to be, waiting to start fire. And there were fires all the time in those early years in the industrial And so Julius, who is Albert's brother, he's a structural engineer, and they worked together to solve some of those problems. And Julius was very motivated for the structural steel, the reinforced concrete, and being involved in that. He formed a company called Truscon Steel Company. He used this truss bar system to reinforce concrete, and did quite a few of the Detroit projects, whether they were the golf club or the news building, using this reinforced concrete. So it wasn't just used in factories, it was used in other substantial buildings. So want to highlight Michael G. Smith recently wrote a book called Concrete Century, Julius Kahn and the Construction Revolution. Wonderful book, look for it. And it talks a lot about this structural influence of Julius Kahn and what he did for Detroit. But he was also at Albert Kahn's company helping make these things happen. So for the structural projects in 1901, the Boyer Machine Company, the U of M Engineering Building, and the Packard Building number 10, among a whole bunch of other projects around Detroit. Those were just highlighting some of the significant ones. As Detroit was owning this industrial reputation, Henry Ford, Bill Knudsen, and James Couzens were three guys who were working really, really hard to make this happen in Detroit. And Bill Knudsen is worked very closely with Albert. They were looking at how do we create efficient operations? How do we create an environment where the workers are safe and comfortable? So the concrete helped them be safe. Efficient windows, daylight and ventilation, all of those things were improving the environment in this industrial, before they were these big brick buildings with not a lot of windows. When you introduce natural light, you introduce daylight, energy efficiency. We had vents in the ceiling so the air could move and it would not be so hot. There was just all kinds of technologies and patents that were done on the buildings and the types of construction that was going on at that time. And people were looking, people noticed, and all around the country and all around the world, people were looking at what's going on in Detroit. Not only the cars are coming out, but these buildings are amazing and they support what's going on, that moving assembly line and all of that stuff. The first assembly line building was in Highland Park, and then it moved to the Rouge site for having a moving assembly line. So it's very, very innovative at the time. And then a lot was going on in Detroit, but 1917 to 1945, you're starting to see things slowing down, especially after the stock market crashed. Detroit's looking at like, whoa, oh gosh, and everything slows down. But it wasn't slowing down around the world, because in Russia, it was a very large space, and they did not have industrialization in Russia. And so they looked towards Albert Kahn and said, what are you guys doing there? And we sent a team of people over to Russia and taught the people in Russia how to create manufacturing facilities. They didn't have ways to build factories for tractors or stuff like that. There's a wonderful book written. It's called it's Detroit, Moscow, Detroit, an Architecture for Industrialization. Awesome book. It is chapters written by multiple people talking about how Albert Kahn and the team went over and what they did to teach others how to use the industrial factory model to help industrialize Russia. Fascinating book. You want to read it. I can't even touch on all of that's in that book. So, but 500, over 500 factories in Russia were designed, built by that team. Then coming back from Russia, it was a time where, the world was in turmoil and we were looking at what do we need to do in the United States to prepare that if there is going to be a war, we needed this arsenal of democracy. And the United States wasn't quite ready, sort of like government can't really decide if we want to engage or not engage. Imagine them fighting like they do now and nothing gets done. And so they reached out to Bill Knudsen, who was certainly an industrial, had an industrial reputation. He was president, I believe he was the president of Ford, or excuse me, General Motors at the time. And he had been called to Washington to talk about what can we do as private industry to prepare. Government wasn't ready, but private industry came to the table. And so there's a wonderful book about Freedom's Forge. It's a little older book, but it talks about how Bill Knudsen gathered these industrial giants. And I love the sentence that says, Bill Knudsen called together the industrial giants to the new center building and presented the need. Well, the new center building is where Albert Kahn's office was, and the Saks Fifth Avenue Saks store. I don't think they were going to the Saks store to talk about this. We know something happened in Albert Kahn's office because the client list that we see after that meeting includes Chrysler, who built tanks and aircraft and watercraft, Continental aircraft and tank engines, Packard, Merlin engines, Marine engines, Ford's B-24 bombers, General Motors engines, vehicles, tanks, Hudson's airplanes, marine engines, and Nash Calvinator, the aeronautic components. Those were all our clients. And we've got drawings, we've got pictures, we've show these were the clients that came together from that industrial. They were making something else and they switched into the arsenal of democracy and really made a difference. So that's a pretty exciting, so that's a book you might want to look at. During all of Albert's lifetime, he earned the architect respect and inspiration. So even though some of them didn't really like his style, others really liked his style. And so you would see very modern stuff like the one on the left inside an Albert Kahn building. And you also see this very industrial looking thing on the right hand side, which was inspiring these other architects to say, hey, that's this modern style of architecture that's really, really cool. And so Albert Kahn, because of the factory design, actually inspired that making of the modern movement. And Terry Smith wrote a wonderful book called Making the Modern, and it kind of talks a little bit about, how that impacted, or Albert Kahn impacted that modern movement. But he did have relationships with all of these architects that are listed here, whether he worked there, worked in collaboration with them. Wirt Rowland, who went off to do amazing things, started and worked in Albert Kahn's office. Frank Lloyd Wright has been in Albert Kahn's office. I like the story when Frank Lloyd Wright says, well, as far as I'm concerned, there's only two great architects in the world, and we're both standing in the same room right now. And he was in Albert Kahn's office. And so, there was this respect, even though they did different styles, there was a respect for each other and a collaboration between architects at that time. One of the other things that Albert was very um, supportive of is encouraging the arts and crafts to be combined into the architecture. He worked a lot, like I said, with the Detroit Arts and Crafts organizations, but he also worked with Puabic pottery and Carudo de Parducci on sculptures. He worked with Diego Rivera with murals, and Anthony Di Lorenzo for bronze work. The bronze work on the right-hand side is, the grill work in the Fisher Building, but you see this beautiful bronze work and architecture and sculpture and plaster and, frescoes, all of that embedded into buildings, but made a richness to the buildings instead of just, fluff on up buildings. They were pieces of art, not just the architecture, but the art inside. But the impact of Albert Kahn is not just Albert Kahn. Like I mentioned, Julius was a huge part, but the other family members also participated. This organization, that Albert Kahn had formed included his wife Ernestine, Julius and his wife Margaret were involved in stuff, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that they did. Felix Kahn was involved. Louis Kahn was involved in the company. He was kind of the business side of things or process side. Moritz was, I'm going to say, the sales guy. I'm not sure if it was really sales, but he traveled. He did a lot of the marketing of the firm in Europe. He's the guy that went to Russia and helped make that happen. And even Molly, sister, was involved with her father in the reproduction industry, and Molly participated in that as well. There's a Albert Kahn in Detroit is a book written by Michael Hodges. He's touches on a lot of the family's involvement. Um, I like there's a few stories where Ernestine and Margaret and Albert and Julius formed a company, Kahn Realty, and they cared, even the wives cared about the environment, building architecture, building stores so people that immigrated could have a place to start a business. And that's part of the portfolio too, is these wonderful storefronts where they lived upstairs and they started a business and they embedded themselves into the Detroit culture. And it's just exciting stuff to read. So there's a whole lot of interesting stories about how this family engaged with the whole Detroit community. This is a wonderful uh, story. We hear a lot about the architecture of Albert Kahn. There's a book written by William Brashear, who's actually a relative of the Albert Kahn family. It's a relative of Albert Kahn, and uh, I love this book because it talks a lot about the character. There's a whole lot of articles, or no, I shouldn't say articles, letters written by Albert to family members. I just think they're fascinating. They tell you a little bit more about the character of Albert and some of the stories where he's writing to you know, his family, and you hear how he thinks a little bit, and it's fascinating. So I encourage you to read that. Um, some of you may say, yeah, that's all history, but I still hear the Albert Kahn name. Well, this year, Albert Kahn's company is 130 years old. So he started this company, like I said, and even though he folded back in, he started it again. He went back out, and he has been engaged. Before he passed away, he passed the company. He developed stockholders. He developed a system so the company would continue on generation after generation after generation. And this is a picture of Kim Montague. She's the company's new president as we celebrate our 130th anniversary this year. She is leading the company, and we are, as a company, doing amazing things to tell that story of, it's still a great work that's happening. I want to take a few minutes and talk about the Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation. So in 2020, we started the Albert Kahn Legacy Foundation to honor, preserve, and educate Albert Kahn stories, and the legacy that Albert Kahn has left on Detroit and left on the architecture world and stuff like that. And so we just wanted to highlight a way for you to engage if you're not already, and that there's some of the things that we do are tours and education. We do bus tours and walking tours, building tours, and we have a wonderful interactive map that shows some of the walking tours that you can take on your own. That's on the Albert Kahn Legacy website that you can look at. And there's not every project in there. There's hundreds on there, but there's a whole lot more that we still have yet to get on there. And our volunteers are helping us figure out what we have for projects, and we're going to be working on building that map out. But we do tours. We had special event. We did this wonderful piano sonata. This is the lobby of the Fisher Building, just in case you have never been there. It's an amazing place to be. But it was a live piano sonata video. You should be hearing about some of this being taken to other places in Detroit, so we can share this with others in Detroit. We are working on a plaque, interactive map, or excuse me, a plaque program, and these plaques are going to be on Albert Kahn buildings, and with that, we verify that the building is in fact an Albert Kahn building, and then the people can purchase a plaque, and with that, they get a lifetime membership for the building owner and an interactive map story of their building on that interactive map. So we celebrated our first one this last year, and that's very exciting. We also have exhibits that can be checked out and used in different locations if we want to help share that story. And we have archives and drawings that we have volunteers come in and are helping us archive again to find out where did we work and what about these buildings and what about these projects, and we're collecting artifacts, and we be our resource for researchers. We also do a lot of advocacy. We are partnering with building owners. This is an example of one of our events we had this year where we went to the historic Temple Bethel that is also the Bonsdale Theater. And when they uncovered, they were delightfully surprised that much of this architecture was still on the building. And so they're in the process of restoring that. And we were there to help them launch their fundraising efforts for the restoration of the front of this back to its era. So I gave you a little bit of overview of Albert Kahn, a little bit of, yes, the company is still around, and some of the programs that we're doing. But if you have questions, please, now's the time to ask questions, and I'm going to stop sharing and answer questions that you might have.
Okay, Heidi, wonderful. Thank you so much. As I said, folks, if you have questions for Heidi, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type them in there. Dave Metzger has an interesting anecdote, Heidi, about Hill Auditorium in Ann Arbor at the University of Michigan, and how the building was after Kahn designed it, the original interior was polychromatic colors and copper leaf, and over time it had been painted all white. And when it was restored about 25 years ago, Mary Sue Coleman, then the president of U of M, said the auditorium used to be like sitting in an eggshell. Now it's like a Fabergé egg.
Ah, I like that. Very nice.
Very nice. Let me ask, well, other people may be putting questions in here. How are Albert's buildings holding up? I mean, a lot of them are well over 100 years old. Some of the factories, the Packard plant obviously is mostly been demolished by this point because it's that style of factory is obsolete. But others like the aquarium seem to be just beautiful in beautiful shape. So how do you think his buildings are holding up?
Well, Albert Kahn did not chintz on quality. That is one of the things that, he felt it was important to make things that are quality that last. And they do, especially with reinforced concrete. Taking down an Albert Kahn building is a lot of work. And even though some buildings sometimes don't look like they're, you drive by and it's like, there's nothing left of this building, like the Packard buildings, they're shells, but they're shells that are great structural stability still. And so, many of the buildings from Albert Kahn are some of the highest they last a lot. Doesn't mean you don't have to invest some money in them, because you do. Nothing's made to last without putting something into it. And but we're seeing a lot more you can adaptively reuse. You're seeing some minor, exterior, you know shell. There's water that's going to penetrate, but that can be restored. So many of the Albert Kahn buildings, even though they've been vacant for a long time, can be restored and can be protected and reused into amazing new purposes, which is exciting.
All right, here's a question. What are some of the projects Albert Kahn Associates is working on right now? Where are you working right now?
Oh gosh, we're having fun. So still very involved in the industrial. Unfortunately, a lot of the industrial is in the South, which is okay if you're in the South, but it's not so happy for people in Michigan. We want that to be in Michigan. Still a lot of automotives. And so, over the last few years, we did Volvo's first manufacturing facility in South Carolina, Greenfield. I mean, it's like all from nothing. There's a VinFast, which is a Vietnamese company. There's BMW's company. We're doing battery plants and battery facilities, but we also have other markets, and we're still working in, the healthcare, the commercial, the adaptive reuse. We're restoring buildings, doing office buildings. Still very much involved in those kind of markets.
Okay. You have a presentation coming up, I believe, at the Packard Proving Ground in March. What's that one about?
Oh, I'm so excited. That is about the Packard. We're going to be talking about Packard's sales and service garage or buildings. And so that's where they would sell the Packards and service the Packards. They're beautiful buildings all over. Many of them are in the southeast. Well, actually, I should say southeast, the eastern part of the United States. And so we're going to be looking at some of those buildings that are repurposed into other things, how they've been restored and used, and some that are still functioning as sales and service. Maybe they're not for the Packard, but they are still sales and service. And so we're going to go through some of those, kind of talk about how Albert Kahn helped Packard, get their wheels on the road, and so that's going to be exciting out at the Packard Proving Grounds. And so watch our website, go to the Packard Proving Ground website. The registration, I believe, is up for that, or if it's not right now, it should be very soon. So, yep.
Okay. Ed is asking, you referenced a number of the books in your presentation, Mike Smith's book on Julius Kahn, Chris Meister's book, and others. Is there a place on the website where those will all be listed, books about Albert that you can?
They are not listed on the website. I believe you can find several of them on Amazon or in local bookstores. I know Pure Detroit handles some of them,
Mhm.
but you can reach out to us and we can help you find them if you can't find.
Good, good. Larry says, I spent nearly 41 years working in Oldsmobile and Fisher Body in Lansing. And he says, I'm guessing some of those earliest buildings were designed by Albert Kahn
That is true.
up in
Yes.
Lansing. Yeah.
Yep.
He designed all over the place.
He was all over the place.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, Chris is asking, can you talk about the move from the New Center building to the Fisher building?
Yes.
I
So
presume he means the firm itself.
yes. So the
Yeah.
firm moved from so the new center building, just back up just a little bit to give you a little history of the new center because it's kind of fun. So the Fisher building was originally supposed to be much larger than it is right now. So we see this big tower. It was only a part, there was supposed to be two of those and then a big 80-story tower in the middle. Depression hit, construction limited it to just the little corner that's the huge Fisher building right now. The other buildings were put in were used to construct the new center building, which is not the current new center, but it became the Albert Kahn building. It was renamed in the 70s to the Albert Kahn building. So the firm moved in there in the late 30s and was there until 2014 when we moved 2014, 2018, sorry. 2018, the company moved from from the Albert Kahn building into the Fisher building, and we're now located on the 18th and 19th floor of the Fisher building. So those buildings were sold. The old Albert Kahn building has now become apartments and condos or something like that. And so the Fisher building is our new home, and we absolutely love being in the Fisher building.
Who would not be?
I know. It's
Yeah.
one of those where people want to work from home, and I'm like, are you kidding me?
Right.
I get to walk through this lobby and, be so thankful that I have such a beautiful place to work. So, yes.
All right, a couple of people are asking, are there public tours or a list of tours of Abercon buildings on the website, or else there are when you schedule those, they are on the Abercon Legacy website.
Yes.
There's also other people do tours too. There's Detroit History Tours. You can find that group. I think Pure Detroit may still be involved in tours. So there's a growing number of architectural tours out there, and anything that the foundation does would be on the website.
Yes,
And
and I want to share that we're encouraging partnerships with people who want to do Albert Contours. I mean, certainly engage with us. And the out at Belle Isle, I'm just really excited because we've had the people from the Belle Isle Conservancy, and one of our volunteers from the office has helped to write a walking tour of the Belle Isle in different languages. And so there's a Spanish version of a walking tour in out on Belle Isle, which is very, very cool. If we can create more of that, we would just love to be able to reach more people.
well, in fact, anonymous attendee, whoever that is asking, are there volunteer opportunities for the foundation?
Oh, yes, please. Yes, we need volunteers. We are pretty much a volunteer organization. However, we do know that there's a lot of needs, and we have had a lot of fun engaging different people at different levels. We need we love to have people work in the archives, of course, because it's fun and just trying to figure out what we have. Um, Tours and events, we always need people, especially we need some people with our social media communications and promoting stuff, sharing stuff. That's huge that we need. And just, you know, reach out to us because we have a whole list of things that we would love to have volunteers help us with.
Good, and you
Sure,
can
there's something for everyone.
reach out to the contact page at the foundation website.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Chuck says the PPG. I'm not sure exactly. The PPG has the
Record Proving Grounds.
yes, okay, has the gate lodge and repair garage, both designed by Albert.
That is true. That
Yeah.
is true.
Okay. One observation I've made before is that Albert was designing at a time when architects could still unapologetically design beautiful buildings. A generation or two on, people like Yamasaki, Eero Saarinen, Bill Kessler had to be almost apologetic in trying to make their buildings beautiful. Ornament, they would design, they were criticized, oh, you're just a decorator. All you do is ornament. Whereas Albert had made no bones at all about making the Fisher Building as beautiful as he possibly could. So it was interesting how that mid-century modernism, which in many ways is a wonderful style, um, really turned traditional notions of architecture on its head and architectural beauty on its head.
Yes, and I think it was interesting because Albert didn't really appreciate the using the industrial style for other things because I mean he liked the beauty of architecture. And so he didn't appreciate that. Well, in return, some of the people didn't appreciate Albert because, he was back designing those really ornate buildings, not these new modern structures. And so, I think that hurt Albert's reputation because they didn't embrace each other and celebrate that. I mean, we look back on it now and we celebrate it, but at the time, you know, he was old fuddy-duddy, he's doing these old classic buildings or whatever, and that wasn't the thing of the time. Um, and that's sad, and that's kind of where we're trying to, we don't want him forgotten. And that's one of the reasons why the foundation is such a important thing is we want that story to be told and we want those buildings to be cherished, whether they're industrial or whether they're beautiful, Art Deco or whatever. He fit all these different periods and they're beautiful buildings in their own sense. And so we want to celebrate all of them and the people that were influenced by any of that work. Detroit's got beautiful architecture, but this architecture trickles across the country and trickles across the world, and we want to celebrate that.
And there's really no other city I know of where one architect had so much to do with all the outstanding, but we have great buildings by Kessler, by Saarinen and Yamasaki and many others, Wirtroll but there's no city that it has such a dominant architect as Detroit and Albert Kahn. I
Yes.
Yeah. Now, John Cram, I think he wants to put you on the spot here.
Yep.
What's the single most important building designed by Albert Kahn in Detroit?
The thing of most important.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
he says important. I guess you could say most beautiful, most significant, most important, whatever.
uh, well, mm, mm, that's a tough one.
Hmm.
Um, I am going to, I'm going to go out on a limb as far as importance. I'm going to tell you my favorite is the
Hmm.
Fisher Building because
Hmm.
who doesn't love the Fisher Building? If you've been inside it, you have to go inside it if you haven't been. But I think the one of the most important was probably the Highland Park plant
Hmm.
because that was the first assembly line building. And the sad truth about that is that building has been neglected and it's such an important building and it breaks my heart and we've got to do something about it. We see how the train station got. Highland Park has a story that the whole world, I mean, we get people from Germany, from France saying, why are we not taking care of that such a significant building? Because it changed the way we manufactured anything. So
Yeah.
I would say that to me is my most important. and it's
Yeah,
neglected.
I'm surprised that something hasn't happened there, even to turn it into housing or something, because we've done so much with our historic buildings in many parts of the city, especially in Woodward Avenue. So it is surprising that that hasn't. And we've been talking about, I came to Detroit in the mid 80s, almost 40 years ago, and we were talking about it back then, and
Yes.
we're still talking about it.
But
Uh,
I want to put in a little plug. So a few weeks ago, okay, it was December. I guess it was only a few weeks ago. Um, Paquette Flats just opened, and that is the Studebaker manufacturing. It was a sales and service, but it was also some manufacturing took place there. That is right next to the Paquette. Some of you may the Paquette plant. That has been turned into apartments, and it is so cool to see an industrial building that was made for Studebaker is a beautiful facility for apartments. And so I just want to, there's so many other buildings out there that are Albert Kahn buildings that are just nestled here and there in neighborhoods and places that people don't know. And I just want to encourage people to look a little closer when you're driving around. And we may have a few more. I mean, I know we have lots.
yeah.
When we looked at the amount of buildings that Albert Kahn designed in Detroit at one point, it was over 900 buildings. We know of 300 that people have called out, but there's a lot more out there. And that's why digging in the archives to me is so much fun. It's like, where are they? Where are they? I want to find them. Are they still there? So, yep.
Speaking of Highland Park, Heidi, do you know who owns the Highland Park Ford facility? Is it the city or
I
there's
think
something called Highland Park Development Company, sort of the
I
civic.
am not exactly sure. I believe the city owns part of it, but I think somebody else owns part of it too, or they have, and I'm not up on who exactly owns it right now.
Okay. And then I guess we can take one or two more. The city airport. Let's see. The original main terminal at City Airport, this is Detroit City Airport, was built by, designed by Albert. Asked if you have any pictures of the construction, which apparently dates from 1929 and 1930 or so. Would there be some? I mean, I'm sure you have some somewhere, probably not at your fingertips here.
No, I don't know where they are.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of our archives are at the University of Michigan Bentley Historic Library. And so if the photos have not been scanned, that's where they are, is in the archives there. There might be some also in some of the Detroit library or Detroit Museum as well. I forget
Right.
exactly where.
Okay, good. Well, tell you what, that's all the questions we have. Heidi, this has been a fascinating discussion. Albert Kahn proves to be endless source of fascinating information. Story. He did so much for so many years, for a 50-year career, worked until the day he died, basically. And as you pointed out, did churches, did museums, did contributed to the arts and crafts movement in Detroit, the industrial designer, modernized the American industrial age. He did so much. And so thank you. And thanks to everybody who's listening in. Again, albertkahnlegacy.org is the website. Go there to learn more, to join, to contribute. And Heidi, last word.
Thank you. And be sure to tell the stories, share with others. We want the next generation to be as excited about this and not forget who Albert Kahn is. So let's keep telling the stories.
Okay, thanks all.
Thank you.
Tune in next time, roughly a month from now. It's on the website for the next presentation, back to Highland Park and looking at Albert Kahn's housing projects there. And watch the website for a lot more to come. Heidi, thank you so much.
Thank you. All
Good night,
right.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.